It is the Martha Zoller Show. I'm here with Joni Alpert, and we got all kinds of things happening, which later on in the program, I'm going to explain to you what happened at the Georgia State Election Board yesterday and what it means for you at the ballot box. But before then, there's a lot going on up in Chicago, and Niall Stanage is with me right now. He is one of my favorite people from the Hill and from NewsNation. He brings an analysis and a look at the facts that you don't get in many places. And we appreciate you very much giving us your time today. Niall, how are you?
I'm good, Martha. How are you?
Did you get any sleep last night?
I did a little bit, although President Biden wasn't helping with that rather late speech. But yes, I got back and got to sleep. So I'm all good to talk to you.
80% of the American people live east of the Mississippi. And the two conventions have both been in Central Time. You'd think they would adjust a little bit because most of the people they're trying to reach have gone to bed by the time the main speaker gets there. Anyway, that's, yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's a completely valid point, actually. I mean, as you well know, modern conventions are really TV spectacles. I mean, yes, of course, they inspire or elicit enthusiasm from the people in the hall, but they're made for TV, and it's odd sometimes that they're not scheduled in a more TV-centered way, so that people see the main speakers in prime time rather than staying up past their bedtime for it, or not.
So what has been your sense first, getting in and out of the facility? How has that been, and what have you observed? And then I want to talk to you about what happened last night.
Well, in relation to the United Center here, normally the home of the Chicago Bulls, obviously it is a little bit of a trek to get in there. There's a lot of tight security around there. When I went yesterday, which was in the middle of the afternoon, the line to get in took about between 45 minutes and an hour to get in. There's a pretty heavy police presence in and around the secured area there. And of course, there was one of the first major pro-Palestinian marches yesterday, although that did not attract as large a crowd as had been anticipated. So any convention has a lot of security. That is understandable, particularly in this modern day and age. But it was heavy but manageable.
And of course, there's been all the comparisons to Chicago from 1968. And, I guess they're anticipating bigger crowds of protesters as the week goes on, because I would assume if you're a protester planning a protest, what you want to disrupt are the big speeches. You know what I mean? Not that President Biden wasn't a big speech, but they're not the acceptance speeches. Are you hearing anything about that?
Yes, I am. I mean, the main coalition here that is marching and organizing the protests comprises upwards of 200 organizations, and they are looking to Thursday as another, another big event. Now, today and tomorrow, they're not anticipating such wide-scale protests, and I think that goes to your point. Not that these aren't big speeches. We have former President Obama, former President Clinton, and of course, Governor Tim Walz over either today or tomorrow. But I think the main focus of the protesters now is on Thursday night when Kamala Harris will she is already officially the nominee, but will ceremonially be crowned as the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, I love your term crowned. It does sort of feel that way. I mean, seriously, I have never in my life in politics seen a coalition around somebody as fast as it's gone around Kamala Harris. The New York Times, I think 8 weeks ago, wrote a big article about how hard she was to work for. And, that kind of, it wasn't glowing press. Let's just put it that way. And then we get this, I think the best thing Joe Biden did timing wise was announcing on the Sunday after the Republican convention, because it completely killed the buzz coming out of that Republican convention, which was pretty well run, and with the exception of the former president's speech being really long, was on time, and it was exciting, and I loved the regular people speeches that they did in prime time. I thought that was really, from a communication standpoint, I thought that was really good. But then that announcement comes on that Sunday, completely kills the buzz, if you will, of the bump coming out of that convention. And it's been a coalescing since then that I have never seen in my life. What about you?
Yeah, it has been extraordinary, I think, how the race has shifted and how Democrats have got behind Vice President Harris as the nominee, right up until the point that President Biden did decide to step aside from his re-election bid. We're well aware there was all the speculation about would there be an open convention, would there be chaos, would there be legal challenges, would some of the credible rivals or potential rivals to Harris, like Governor Gretchen Whitmer or Governor Gavin Newsom, come forward. None of that happened, and the Democrats really rode in very strongly behind Harris. And, you mentioned that New York Times piece from before this current era. I mean, it is remarkable that she has got really very glowing press since then. Now, I assume there will be more scrutiny applied to her. We have seen some criticism of this disinclination to give one-on-one interviews or full news conferences. But I assume at some point this honeymoon period is going to come to an end. It clearly has not done so yet, and it seems unlikely to do so during a Democratic convention.
Well, and look, I am old enough to remember when it wasn't unusual to have a cycle short like this. I mean, heck, in 1968, it was late March when LBJ got out, and so that was, and of course, we had the tragic assassinations of MLK Jr. and then Bobby Kennedy, who really kind of shortened the cycle that we had in 68. I think John Kennedy didn't announce until March of 60 that he was running, and then ended up being the nominee and winning the election. So we used to have a lot shorter cycles than what we have now, because I'm getting the phone calls, I'm betting you are too, of people that are already thinking about running in 2028. So we now have these 24/7, 12-month-a-year cycles that go on for years. So this is a shorter cycle, but maybe it'll be better. Maybe they'll get to the point right away, and that we'll get through this. We'll get to the election. I think coming out of this convention, what has to happen on both sides is they need to focus on issues, but especially on the Trump side. I think the Nikki Haley advice that she gave last week was spot on, that you've got your base, you've got to expand your base.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Republicans feel that way about the former president, because after all, in the nation as it is currently constituted, the nominee of either major party probably starts off with, what would you say, Martha, 45% of the vote? I mean,
42 to 45, yep.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to fall below that number, which of course means that elections are decided by two things, one being the quite small sliver of voters in the middle, and the other being whether you can turn out your party base effectively and enthusiastically. Now, on the latter point, I don't think there's any problem for Trump there. I mean, he has a very strong base, as we have discussed everywhere in the media at great length. But the question is, can he expand beyond that to actually win an election, or does he alienate those people in the middle? And there are similar questions, though, of a somewhat different contour when it comes to Kamala Harris. But yes, I mean, I think Nikki Haley's argument in relation to Trump and the Republican Party was a pretty credible one.
So I got two more questions for you. Did it surprise you that it seems that in both cases, Trump and Harris, that they picked a VP that more represents their base than the expansion of the party?
Did it surprise me is a great question. I don't think it did surprise me all that much. Certainly not in Harris's case, where I think she's trying to make a transition from a Biden candidacy that didn't inspire great enthusiasm to a Harris and now Harris-Walz candidacy that she hopes will do so with among liberal voters. Now, whether that is a prudent strategy or not, we'll probably have to wait until the day after Election Day to find out. In relation to former President Trump, I think that he was probably seeking someone who, at least now, is very much aligned with him in terms of demeanor and political viewpoint. Obviously, Senator Vance had previously been rather critical of Donald Trump, but he has latterly become much more supportive, and that seemed to dovetail with what Trump wanted.
And then finally, what are you looking forward to over the next couple of days? What's the specific things you're looking for?
Well, I think one issue will be when former President Obama speaks, that is typically a high point in any Democratic convention. I understand that half the country is Republican approximately and probably doesn't like the former president very much, but in Democratic circles, he's regarded as sort of the best orator of his generation, so there'll be a lot of excitement around that. Tim Walz's speech will be interesting to watch, Martha, particularly because we've only seen a few speeches on the campaign trail. This will be the biggest moment yet for him. Former President Clinton, to make a long story short, I think his legacy has grown rather more complicated in liberal minds because of the obvious scandal that attended his presidency and the way that has, I think, come to be looked at even more harshly than it was at the time. So I'll be interested to see what kind of reception he gets.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see that too. And we appreciate you being with us today. It's always great to get your insight, and stay safe up there because who knows what's going to happen in the next few days. Maybe you can just not leave the center. Just stay inside for 3 days.
Perhaps that's the way to go.
Thank
you,
you
Martha.
very much.
You have a good day.